I worked with some guys to start this, and they're like, why are you doing this? I'm like, I want to build relationships with people that I may not be able to get FaceTime with.
I love that question. Yeah. No, it makes complete sense. And to a large extent, it is for a certain set of people at first.
But I think that's an interesting perspective on how do you
have to be actually enjoying the process.
It's a metric of success.
Yeah.
Because you have no other way of quantifying joy.
Don't forget that the biggest thing that's actually coming out of every single one of these journeys is the kind of person you're becoming.
I'll ask you a last question from the previous guest.
So I wanted to ask the next guest, where do you feel like you're not free in your current journey?
Hey guys, welcome back to Funds and Founders. Today we have on Sarthak. You are currently at UT doing a master's, building a company, and you're also a podcast host at your podcast called True Kauling. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, man.
One thing I like asking everyone is, where do you think your entrepreneurial journey started? Where do you think you started down this path? What was the first memory or instinct or moment that you thought, this is what I want to do?
So I think my entrepreneurial journey hasn't necessarily started in a lot of ways, because even though I'm right now kind of like a founding member of the startup, I still don't feel like I'm the entrepreneur in this startup. It's called GigPay. And but where like the inkling to like go into the smaller startup ecosystem started was back in school. I was in UCSD, and I came across this accelerator on campus called The Basement. And for people that don't know, an accelerator, it's again like just another version of a venture fund of sorts, where you basically try to bring very early stage, maybe idea stage companies and try to help them grow and
materialize into an actual business product company.
Exactly. So that's when I came across a bunch of student founders, and that's kind of like what lit me up about like, okay, this could be something that I actually can sort of be a part of, at least maybe not at the helm, but be supporting other founders. So that's sort of where the journey actually started. And then I ended up interning at a bunch of startups. So I interned, when I was first year from college, the summer, I ended up interning with a VC fund in Singapore.
Nice.
So that was another different side of the same game, and kind of seeing how people deploy capital. That was interesting. Then I ended up moving over to the startup side, where I was working as an intern for a fintech. Actually, the last episode I did was with the the manager for that startup. It was called Juvo. So that's sort of where it started. Nice. And then I ended up joining an accelerator out of college that was here in Austin. And then I just it was called New Chip.
Okay.
So it was, and it shut down like 2 years ago, I think. But that was like an accelerator for me, honestly, to just see what kinds of things people are building, not just in the US, but globally. That's kind of the in, I think, into entrepreneurship.
When you've been to a bunch of startups, VCs, what's one thing that attracts you towards a smaller, scrappier startup versus a big tech company?
The answer is very cliche, but honestly, it is impact. Like, it is the level of control you feel you have in changing other people's circumstances. It's a different game, and a little backstory on that. So the first job I actually had right after college was with this startup that wasn't this accelerator. It was another company, and I had been interning with them 6 months during my college. And within those 6 months, I saw they got acquired by this behemoth of a company. And through the time that I was there, which was only a few months from there, I saw how the culture changed from working on problems to working on people and trying to figure out what's happening behind the scenes and the optics of it and stuff. And I was like, this is not where the focus should be.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like why I find the smaller startup ecosystem much more fulfilling, honestly.
Does that mean that throughout your career, you're going to want to get a company to a particular point, and then you're probably going to go look for something that's earlier in the journey?
Yeah, and it's sort of like it was ridiculed probably early on, like a few years ago. Yeah. But now it seems to be it's becoming the norm, right? Like, and I love that process. I love the 0 to 1 stage of things. Like, yeah.
I think the reason that's super important is knowing where your skill set lies. I used to work at Indeed.com, and I had this senior director who would be like, hey, I know how to take a company from 0 to 1 to 10 to maybe 20 million ARR. Above that, that's not my forte. It's not something I've done. It's not something I know how to do. Maybe I can figure it out, but I'm not super comfortable doing it, right? And I feel like understanding where your skill set lies, because 0 to 1, very different game than 1 to 10, very different from 10 to 50, 50 to 100, right? I think the skill set and acumen required changes. I feel like people talk about this, that Zuckerberg is the only one who's actually truly done a 0 to, like, I don't know if Meta is $1 trillion company or not, but he's one of the only founders who's truly done that full journey alone.
I would add Jensen to that probably.
Probably, yeah. I don't know when he started out, but probably, yeah. I think similar trajectory, right? And I think there's very few people who've done it. Understanding if you're a 0 to 1 to maybe a 5 million ARR kind of guy, knowing that that's where you lie, I think requires a lot of maturity. Like, hey, I got it here. Let's hire someone in to figure out the rest, because it's not what I can do, right? And if you're most effective in those early journeys, being in those is probably best bang for your time, right?
Yeah, I think the kind of person, at least from my personal experience, that's attracted to the 0 to 1 is someone that's constantly looking for insights.
Okay.
It's someone that is like, it wants to find the truth in the exploration phase. And I think the 0 to 1 phase is the highest number of insights you'll probably gain for the thing you're building compared to the rest of the phase, where the insights drop, but the execution matters more than the insights. And so for me, I can tell you, like, the reason I'm drawn to that is because I love finding the aha moments. Like, it's like one of my favorite things. Even right now, I get the chills. I don't know why, just thinking about it, because I think it's such a beautiful process of, like, having some sort of an inkling of what is happening here, and then, like, talking to a bunch of people to understand, oh, this is the actual problem. And this is the thing that, and you hear multiple perspectives, and then you have to discern what the truth is within that perspective. And that's sort of like the scientist's way of thinking about it too. That's the part I think that people who are into the 0 to 1 are really interested by. I'll give you an example of this. Like, the director of this program, the MSTC that I'm part of right now, her name's Melly Price, and she is been in the entrepreneurial journey herself, like, for a while. Started a bunch of companies. One of them that people now will know is, like, the Major Pickleball League, which is sort of the biggest league for pickleball, and pickleball is growing as a sport, of course. She is so into the 0 to 1 phase. She actually recently sold her stake in Major Pickleball League, and she's one of the co-founders with another guy who started this league. Not many people will ever know about Melly Price. They will know about the Kevin Durants who invested in the 3rd round, but that's the sort of stuff. And she loves, again, same reason, like, she loves finding the scrappy insights that come out of the process of building it. I think that's, like, kind of like what drives them.
So when you say aha moment, right, just going back to that real quick, are you talking about identifying a pain point that could be a potential solution business? Or are you talking about, hey, we know you have this problem, here is the right solution for you? Or a little bit of both, or maybe...
I think it's a little bit of both, but where it starts is, I'll give you an example. So right now, I am working on a project with a couple of students in this program. And when we were doing this thing over the summer, we were, like, doing this thing called as a quick look, which is, like, a local term that they use, like, within UT Austin for quickly, like, looking at different technologies that are coming out of university IP. And we found this, like, very hard to, there was no centralized place, like a pitch book that you have for private companies to find university IP. And so we were like, okay, what can we do about this? Because we have this problem. And so we started talking to a bunch of these offices that are, every major college in the US has these thing called as a tech transfer office. And they basically are the ones which, like, issue a patent or start the process of commercializing IP. And right now we're talking to dozens of these tech transfer offices, and we're realizing, like, what we thought is the person to buy this, which is the tech transfer office, might not be the person. So what insight we got was, like, it might just be a enterprising entrepreneur who wants to find technology that they want to partner with, or it could be the R&D organizations that want to find technologies on campus that they can quickly buy. But this insight we would have not gotten if we would have not talked to these tech transfer offices.
Makes sense.
So it's like, so now the solution is catered to them, but the insight is coming also from just the conversations we're having.
Makes sense. What part of that process do you enjoy? Is it the doing the customer interviews? Is it the discerning the data you get? Is it the ideating based on the data you see? Because that itself is a long process. It's a cumbersome process. It may not be long. what parts of it excite you the most?
Yeah, I love connecting ideas that don't seem connected.
Okay.
Like it's the talking to people of different fields and then coming up with a, whoa, this is how this thing connects to that thing. And then how do you build that into a solution, I think is like the part where I love the most. So, I mean, the reason I have a podcast is also because of the same reason. It's like, I love talking to all kinds of people. And I would do that even if I didn't have a podcast. That's what I was doing. And then finding the things that I can apply from this thing to a completely unrelated field. And I've seen that has led to the most creative solution. So I think it's the creativity that really, drives me.
Nice. Quick transition. Why don't you plug the podcast? What are you trying to do? Where can people find it?
I appreciate that. So, podcast is called True Kauling, based on my last name, Kaul, Kaul. And it's it started off as a small project during college, actually. When I was I got really intrigued by this one professor during UCSD. And this guy teaches this course at UCSD called Making of the Modern World. And it's sort of the history of humanity, literally from the beginning to now. And it's like a 5-6 quarter sequence that each quarter builds upon the other. So I kind of say it's like the Sapiens book, but like taught in like professor like that. So I started talking to that guy and I was like, hey, professor, his name's Edmund Chang. And I was like, hey, would you be interested in just like talking about this and your journey through this? Why are you so intrigued about this? And he's like, sure. So that's kind of how it started. And it kind of has morphed into a bigger problem that I see in our world right now, where people are, especially in the younger generation, are trying to find something that is more purposeful in their life, their true calling. And so
they want to get out of the rat race.
Yeah, they want to find something that they genuinely like lights them up. They want to find work that is fulfilling and they're not just another number in the organization. And so that's sort of like what drove me to start this, is to talk to people that have found that for themselves in some way and discuss their journey. And maybe it will help someone else find something similar that they like.
Nice. We'll link everything in the description for the podcast. I have this joke where I'm like, hey, retention on episodes is 5-6 minutes at the most. So you got to plug in the first 6 minutes. Because I don't know who's listening to the rest of it, right? But yeah. So going back to your journey, you started the pod, you've worked at a bunch of companies, you're doing this master's. Why did you end up starting the pod? Based on, you had that first conversation, you think there's a gap, but why go the podcast route? Why not any other format?
So I think the core issue from these conversations has been more about how college as an ecosystem is not leading people to the lives that they hope that they would lead to. And so for me, it was at some point actually exploring alternative ways to build something in the education space. And I've actually kept on like building relationships in the education space. I go for South by EDU every year to do that as well. But I think that's a much longer term fix for that big of a problem. So podcasting for me has become a natural way to start the distribution.
Okay.
Because I have always loved understanding where people come from. And so this isn't something that I was like, I've been listening to podcasts since 2016, 2017. And I recently posted this on my Instagram as well. It was like, I saw this video. I'm blanking out on the director who it was a video of a director that was talking about how someone asked him like, did you start this because with an audience in mind? And he's like, yes. And the audience was me. And it was like, I was the one who, nice. Quentin Tarantino. It was Quentin Tarantino. And he was like, it was a beautiful, beautiful short. And it was like, yeah, like I started this for me. I was the guy who would like wait for every single movie to come out and then go for the first show, first day. And I would see that. And then I was like, wait, there's still this thing missing. And so I've been the same kind of in the podcasting space. I've been there for so long. I've been listening and have been the audience member for so long. But I was like, I still find these conversations missing. Like these bigger conversations about how do you help that individual who's struggling with finding something that really lights them up. And that's kind of like why I chose podcasting specifically. But I think the longer term vision is to build things adjacent to a podcast. Maybe even like a fund that helps other people pursue some things for a short amount of time
like
to find the project.
Like a Thiel fellowship for this.
Yeah, like a fellowship. And I talked about this. I recorded a solo pod. I haven't uploaded this yet because it was so nerve wracking, dude. It was like I don't know if you've recorded a solo pod before. dude, it's like the weirdest thing to look at a camera by yourself in an empty room.
Yeah.
And I kind of like mentioned there too, like, I think the scope for this is much larger. So to tie this together, I think people have figured out the tech side of things a lot. And I think the cost of making technology would keep on dropping. And the only thing that would remain is distribution.
Makes sense.
So that's kind of why I started.
Okay. Also, quick idea, and people have recommended this, is if you want to do a solo pod, have someone ask you the questions and you just record it. You have an ISO feed, you have the camera pointing at you, and you just cut it up to be like you're talking instead of someone asking you. But it makes it feel more natural. So that's an idea if you want to try that out. Cool. So going back to the podcast, right? So you're trying to help people, you're trying to capture stories of why you're doing this, why does this fulfill you, why do you enjoy whatever it is that you're doing in that episode, right? Whoever the guest is. What's your take on working towards finding a profession that fulfills you versus working towards a profession that, you're doing for livelihood? Because I feel like sometimes people say this from a place of privilege, where being able to say, hey, I'm going to do this even if I lose money on this, right? Like, you're saying that because you have the privilege to lose that money, right? I feel like there's also a big chunk of society who are trying to balance the, hey, I got to make money, I got to pay my loans off, whatever, right? You come to the States from India, you have so much pressure on you to make money, send some home, whatever, right? Depending on your situation. It's harder to do the passion fulfillment when you're in that situation. And that's one example. There's probably a bunch of people in various situations. So how do you think about that balance of, okay, I need to find this, I need to figure out what this is, but at the same time, I don't have the privilege to just drop everything. So I'm going to be occupied with whatever my stream is here while I do this, right? How do you juggle those? Do you have any recommendations, or based off the 10, 15 stories you've done so far, what's been an insight to allow people to figure this out while this path, you can't really let go of this? I don't know if that long-winded, but I
love that question. Yeah. No, it makes complete sense. And to a large extent, it is for a certain set of people at first. I think to the privileged few that don't have to think about money, but that privileged few is a lot of people.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing that I try to go back to. I think it's not just a US-centric problem anymore.
100%.
You're from India. You've seen people in your friend circle having the same conversations, and I think the thing to that, tying it together, is that it's just a hierarchy of sorts, where Maslow's hierarchy to some extent, where you are until you're focused on like just making the bare minimum, completing the food, water, shelter. Beyond that, you can start thinking about these things, of course. The thing that I've noticed is like a lot of students in the US, not just international, but also local here, they spend time on work where they can choose a different line of work that would be more aligned with the things that they are interested in. So a lot of people just end up becoming a barista, for example. Like, it's just like a common thing to do, is that if you're in high school or you're in college, the summer you're like there free, or like in the evening you're just going to become this like a barista or do something, and it has its own skills. But if you're not interested in that and you want to actually find other things that are more aligned, there's enough opportunities. There's no lack of opportunities to find. And I'll give you my personal example. I'm working with this startup, GigPay, and we're building this thing. And there's these funds that are out there that are like consistently hiring interns. And if anyone's at all interested in startups, like, just try to reach out to them. Like, no one is out of like, everyone is in touch in some ways. You can find someone's email, you can find someone's phone number, and you can email them asking if you're interested in that field. Hey, can I just grab like 15 minutes of your time? Can I just go and ask you a few questions? I think this is something I want to pursue. And for a college student, there is a much higher chance that you will be, accepted in terms of the invitation will be taken.
100%.
People are open to this, and Riley Simpson, who was one of the guests on my podcast, put it perfectly. It's like, when you're in college, the .edu email is a VIP pass to anyone on the face of the earth, honestly. And like, it's like, how many people are using that as a way to like work towards, not even maybe be in that situation right now, but work towards that. So I think it's more of a question of like, are you willing to try your hand at going beyond the way that you make money right now to find other avenues that are more fulfilling and also maybe more revenue generating?
uh, the episode I just recorded before this, he has this thing where I keep telling him, hey, I'm battling between, do I want to do this or that? I'm doing so many things. He's like, what's stopping you from trying one thing? Okay, it doesn't work. You got a job, you didn't like it. Go find another job in what you like. Great, you didn't like it. Go find another job.
Yeah.
Like, what is stopping you from doing that? Because in reality, he's like, hey, you think you're interested in this? Go try this. And if you're not, you'll realize it. And then you know what not to do. And you can keep ticking off the what not to do until you find the what is to do. And I feel like that's maybe a more risk taking mentality, but I feel like it's a very good perspective to put into things where not everything has to be set in stone. Not everything has to be the perfect execution. Go figure it out. Like you said, get a job as a barista while you figure out what to do. And then while you're going to school, while you're doing this, try different classes. Undergrad and grad school in the US, you have the privilege to try out different specialties, try out different classes, different verticals. As a computer science, doesn't mean you have to only take computer science, right? You can go take a geography class. You can go take other classes, go sit in on lectures, go audit courses. There are ways to do it. But just like you said, getting into that mentality of, okay, it's not rigid. I don't have to do tech, do a master's, go get a job at big tech, and then grow up the chain, and then switch jobs and make more money. And like, that's the traditional.
Yeah, and I don't mean to critique in any way. It's more like, let me just put this into perspective. I think it's the quality of building courage.
Yeah.
Because I think the opposite of courage is fear in some ways. And fear is what stops most people at the root of it. It's like the fear of not hearing back from someone, or the fear of like not actually getting that. But the definition of courage is literally doing things in spite of fear. So it's like, if you're doing something regardless of the outcome of it, you're probably accumulating across time enough experiences which will lead to some outcome. So it's like, can you push aside your fear for that moment where you can just send the button, click the email button and just send it. And that's the thing that I think I want to help push more people to try to do. That's what's the worst that would happen, right? It's like, you won't hear back from someone. There's thousands of people out there. And if you're at the stage where you're thinking about what to choose, there's enough options to choose from.
Yeah.
So going back to your point, it is that. I think it is like the courage aspect that we need to like promote more, I think.
Do you think you figured out what you want to do?
I think so. And I think at least the way I think about what I want to do is the things that I want to do, I kind of like think about it like, if I was to be 60, 70 years old and I was looking back at this phase of life, what are the activities I would want to be doing every day? And I think I'm doing most of those activities right now. Like, I would have loved to have these conversations and a catalog of conversations put together.
Nice.
And I stopped actually, speaking of fear, like I stopped, like that first conversation I had with Edmund Chang, I put that up, and if you see, you can see, I haven't removed anything on YouTube. That conversation was in 2020 or 2021.
Okay.
And then for 2 years, I didn't post anything, even though I had 5 conversations that I recorded. And that was the exact same thing. It was the fear of not doing it. And so it takes time to get over that. But I think you have to let your ego aside to just go like, hey, it doesn't have to be the best thing that comes out. And we were just talking about this before the recording. Like, it's like, it'll take time for things to come out to be the quality you expect and the product that you really imagine it to be. But it only starts by starting.
If you don't put the reps in, it's not going to...
Exactly.
I think a lot of people, and especially I think social media is partially to blame for this, is that if you don't get the immediate validation or gratification of doing something, it's not worth doing, right? But I think what people fail to miss is a lot of the people on social media right now who are getting the views and getting the like and the validation and the clout have been doing it for 6, 7, 8 years, right? Like if we're talking about Diary of a CEO, I think he's blown up in the last year or two, but I think he's been doing this for 4, 5 years, if not longer. And so that's a grind. That's like Chris Williamson based in Austin. I think he's been doing this for 6 years.
Yeah.
And now he's at the point where he has the subscribers, and probably in the last year or so is when he's grown. But he did it for he was a bouncer when he started it in a club somewhere in UK. I think no one.
Yeah, I think he was a club promoter.
Yeah, no one quote me on that. But but no, I think a lot of people disregard the journey, and they just want to like hop step to the, oh hey, here's the end goal. Here's what I want, right? So it's interesting. You've done 10, 15 episodes. Is there one key takeaway that stuck with you, or is there one story that you feel like has resonated with you more and you've just always referred back to?
The recency bias is alive right now because I just recorded this conversation with the founders of Medici.
Yeah.
And for people that don't know Medici, it's like a flagship cafe in Austin. They have a couple of locations, one at the airport. And they started back in 2006. Doing something for 18 years has its own grind. They talk about this story on the podcast where they almost went bankrupt. And something about that conversation really impacted me, and I've been reflecting on it because when they started this cafe, they also had kids. They have a few kids, like I think 5 kids. And the cafe became more than just a place for conversations for them. It became livelihood.
Yeah.
So I think the thing that when I reflect on all the different conversations I've had, it's about choosing your hard. Anything that you're going to probably pursue that's worthwhile is going to be hard. So it's just about making the decision to choose what's worth pursuing. And that is a downstream effect of figuring out what you truly value in the world, honestly. And it can't come out of someone else's mouth. If you're saying the same words, this is a good metric to figure out like what is coming from you versus others. If you're literally repeating someone else's words, exactly, verbatim, you are probably not thinking for yourself.
Yeah.
And so find your values, find what you really care about, what you truly care about, and then build off of that. And it will be hard. And that's the whole point. It's supposed to be hard. If it was easy, you would have not even thought about it. If happiness was easy, you would have not grinded your way into figuring out why you're suffering so much. Like those are things that like really matter. And you have to choose your hard in that scenario. So I think that's the common reflection is like everyone chose their version of what hard looks like. And for Patrick Barlato, who's a professor, he holds the record for the most amount of classes taught in UT Austin. For him, the hard was to build material that is different from every other professor because they're given material. They can just like literally just speak out in exactly the same way as the material is given. But he chose to innovate on that and like brings out his own take on it and stuff.
What does he teach?
He teaches accounting,
Okay.
Finance and accounting in a bunch of different, like 16 different classes. And so for him, it was like choosing to build something and create content on your own, which is hard. And for each class he prepares, it takes at least a few hours for him to prepare for each class. And he has classes every day. So where's the time? Choose your time, find your time. Like that's the thing. Like the hard comes with the time you have to put into it. And I think that's the commonality across different people I've gotten so far.
100%, yeah.
What would you say, actually? I'm curious to hear.
In what perspective?
The guests you've had, what has been a common theme?
So I feel like, I've had a little bit of everyone, right? I've had coaches on, I've had founders with exits on, I've had founders who are still grinding, I've had founders with first company, I've had founders with 6th, 7th, 8th company. I think it comes down to why are you building this company, right? So like Justin, again, recency bias. He doesn't grind. It's not like he's doing 100-hour weeks. He has a very balanced day. He wakes up, he runs every day. He works 9 to 5. He takes a walk in the evening. He lives at home with his parents, spends time with his family. And so he's pretty set on like why he's building this and how he's building this, right? He had given himself 2 years to figure it out. Stuff changed along the way. And he's like, okay, I don't have a timeline anymore. So he now has hey, here's what I'm building the company into. And that may take time. Mm-hmm. That may take longer than 2 years. So he's set on his path, right? So I think one thing that stuck with me is everyone has a why. Everyone has why are they doing what they're doing? Why do they enjoy it? And what is their thesis, right? And I feel like if you have a thesis, it's okay to go down a path, build a company. And if at any point that thesis changes or you have more information or maybe that problem is not a problem anymore, it's okay to reset and take a break and go get a job and then figure out, okay, here's what I'm going to do next, right? A lot of people, I can probably pick out maybe 7 or 8 different episodes where this has happened, where they started something, it didn't work for whatever reason. Okay, it's not a setback, it's a growth. It's okay, now let me go reset, get out of debt, figure shit out, and then I'll start something else. And then, okay, I found an idea, found a problem. Let's go try to figure it out. Okay, co-founder conflict. Let's shut that down, reset. And then you learn something every. So it's not a grind. It's not all or nothing. It's a path. It's a journey. And that journey morphs. And it's okay to morph. And as long as you have your fundamentals and your why set, like, okay, here's why I'm building this. Here's my thesis. Okay, thesis got disproved because of something that was happened today. Okay, what does that mean? Do I pivot? Do I figure it out? Do I shut it down? Do I start another thing? In everyone I've had, I don't think anyone's really panicked and made decisions based out of panic. Long-winded way to say, understanding why and having a thesis is important when you're building a company, and just constantly evaluating that. Okay, is this still correct? Am I still doing this? Why am I still doing this? Is that thesis still alive? Okay, it's not alive. Okay, do I pivot? Do I shut it down? Do I figure out next step? So
I'm a big believer in curiosity. I think all those questions you asked require you to be constantly curious.
100%. Yeah.
And I think it's another. I think there's a market for curiosity. Like people, there's not enough curiosity in the world, I think. And I think the people that continue to do things like, and they keep on building on their failure, are people who are asking the questions beyond that and not just taking it as like a data point that they can't do anything with. So I think the questions you're asking after something didn't go well, and they wanted to like, or they pivoted, or their thesis completely changed, which is like a big thing because for people it's like their worldview sort of changing. So it's like, how can you then ask the right questions to go the other path? So I really believe that curiosity is like the fundamental skill you need to have to be able to do the things beyond a failure.
I also think knowing why you're doing something. So I've had a couple founders on who are like, hey, I need this to be a big liquidity event for me, whether it's in 5, 7, 10 years, because they left some stuff to start this, right? So along with their thesis, this has to result in a certain way for it to make sense. And knowing that is also fine. I'm not saying don't do it for the payday, but being cognizant and truthful about, hey, I'm building this because I see a problem, I have a thesis, but I also know this can be a big exit. And being aware of that, because you make decisions accordingly, right? You're not just then going to sign any term sheet. You're not just going to invest any amount of money. You know what outcome you want. And so if at any point you think that outcome's not possible, it's very clear for you not to do this anymore, because it's going to become a pain, because you're never going to reach that outcome, even if the thesis and problem is valid. But knowing why you're in this helps you make that decision better. But yeah, and I think knowing that also takes a lot of maturity, right? Being able to accept and realize that, hey, I am doing this because of this. Accepting that, I think, is also very hard, because I think people don't want to openly say, hey, I am doing this because I want to make $10 million in the next 5-10 years. And I think this is going to do this because of XYZ. I think people are very shy of being judged, of being saying that. And I think it's totally fine to be that. Just make sure you're making decisions that help you get there and not make it harder for you to get there, right?
When I was coming back from the podcast with Merici, I took an Uber and I sat in with the Uber driver and he's like, what were you doing here? And I was like, I was recording a podcast. And he's like, how did that go? And I was telling him about this challenge that Merici had in bankruptcy and stuff. And he's like, man, I empathize so much with that. I just filed for bankruptcy. And he started going into this thing around like how he loved engineering and he loved coding and he loved coding on these projects. But when he took up the job of coding, it turned from a hobby to this chore that he has to do. And sort of that basically led him to like make a bunch of bad decisions financially, which is where like why he filed for bankruptcy. But at that moment, he was like, I have an idea of like what I want to do, but I think I'm too scared of like failing. I'm like, why are you scared of failing? He's like, well, because like I don't know, like I feel like it would just be bad for me again. I don't want to be bankrupt and stuff. And then I asked him this question, is like, are you scared of failing because of the financial outcomes per se, or are you scared of failing because of what people would say after you fail? And he had this moment of like epiphany. He's like, he's like, it's definitely the second one, because the first time that I went bankrupt, my parents were like extremely like sad, angry, everything, that how did you make this happen? How did you even reach to a place where this happened? And it's a lot of times the stories we tell ourselves are the stories that we hear other people telling us about the things that we care about. And so it's about like separating why is it that when you say why you're doing something, how much of that is coming from you versus how much of that is coming from someone else that's saying this is how it should be done. So I think it's very important to like get clear on like why you're doing those things.
100%. Yeah. I don't know why when you were telling that story, I have this friend from UT. He's a trader in New York, probably earns high 6, low 7 figures right now. And he told me this thing where when he joined UT, his parents had given him 10K for like what they had saved for college. And he was trading the market and he thought he was too cool. He's like an 18-year-old. He lost it all, right? And his parents are like, the fuck? He's like, okay, this is your problem now. We're not giving you any more cash, so figure it out, right? And so he learned, but knowing that, okay, it wasn't a mistake per se, but that was part of his, I like this. I like the risk-taking side of this. I like trading. I'm going to go down that path. That was probably instrumental to him going down and now becoming a big shot trader in New York, right? But I think also taking those sorts of risks and jabs and, one-offs, like, I don't know, there's a term for this, right? Like when you get an opportunity and like, don't overthink it. Sometimes you should just like go and say,
like full send?
Probably, but
full send, bro.
But I think there's a lot of merit to also being a little naive on that side, because it helps you figure these things out, right? You were talking about hobbies and passion and the cab driver. I do leatherworking for fun, right? I make wallets and stuff. And people are like, why don't you sell things? I'm like, because I don't want it to become something that I'm forced to grow as a business, right? I would rather sell $400-$500 wallets and make them and enjoy making them and make them with a lot more care than just churn out and like get a bunch of orders. And like there's all these people I've seen go viral on Instagram where they're backed up for 4-5 weeks. Now they're just production because they're producing something they've enjoyed making. I don't know if they still enjoy it or not, right? But I don't want to turn that hobby into something that's a chore and I stop doing it. I would rather take 6 months and make someone a wallet than be forced to do it on a schedule and deliver and, oh, I don't like it and returns. And there's all this like nuances, right? So I think understanding why you're doing something before you build it into a business and an income stream. Again, maybe I'm saying this from a place of privilege because I don't need to build a leather making business, but it's something I would like to do at some point to represent the craft that I'm trying to build.
So that's super cool. That's super niche.
I feel like there's too many, so I need a niche within a niche.
Yeah. Same for podcasting, I feel like.
Yeah. Again, right, like I worked with some guys to start this and they were like, why are you doing this? I'm like, I want to build relationships with people that I may not be able to get FaceTime with, but this is a way for me to build that relationship. Maybe I've done an okay job of it. I wouldn't say that every guest of mine I can reach out to and text and be like, hey, you want to hop on a call for something, right? Some of them I can probably do a better job of like rekindling that. But I'm very clear that I'm not doing this for views. I would like views. I would like sponsors. I would like someone to pay me to do this. But I enjoy this. I don't enjoy the post-production part of it. So I've been trying to figure out how do I make the post-production process seamless enough where it doesn't seem like a chore to me. Because I think I can do a better job of how the edits are cut up. I can do a better job of cross-posting and doing LinkedIn and Insta. I don't have TikTok. So I think there's all these things I can do, but I'm afraid it will become a chore for me and I won't like it. So the path I've chosen right now is let me book people, let me enjoy the conversation, prep for the conversation, and then I have a team who does all post-production. I'm not the happiest with it, but it's no time from me. It's someone handling it, right? So again, I'm very cognizant of what this is for me, where I'm at with this. When I do want to grow it, I do know I will have to spend more time with it. So I am okay with that. But if I want to grow it, I know, okay, this means I got to spend another 5 to 10 hours a week doing edits, giving edit notes, being better about, okay, what do I want the thumbnail and title to be? But until I'm ready to do that, I should be okay with where it's at and not over emphasize on growth and this and views and that, right? So I don't know why I started talking about that. We're talking about growth of the podcast. Yeah.
Yeah, but this reminded me of when I was in college, this is during COVID, 2020, I think 2020, and I was taking this course outside of school. So for those people that don't know about flow state, it's this zone where you're in, where like time kind of just passes by. You're so entrenched in the work that you're doing that you don't even realize time's passed by, and that whole concept of flow was started by this Hungarian professor, psychologist called Mihai Csikszentmihalyi.
Okay.
He started a organization with this guy called Stephen Kotler, who's a US, I think he's written a bunch of books, called Flow Research Collective. So I took this program basically on how to access flow states. And the reason I bring up flow states is because flow state, like when you're in flow, you're typically doing activities that you enjoy doing, but there is a level of challenge to the activity that you can't just do it for fun like all the time. Okay. So a good example of this is like when they research musicians, for example, like violinists who were practicing a piece where they have enough skills to like play the violin, but they're learning a new piece. And there is a sweet spot where like the challenge level is slightly higher than the skill level. And for a lot of these things you're talking about, like post-production and like how you don't like certain things, I empathize with that, and I see that. And just for anyone who's listening, like think about the things that you don't enjoy doing, or you find like almost anxiety towards doing them. It's typically because the challenge is so much higher than your skill level that you have to first like get better at the skill of doing that.
Yeah.
And to actually enjoy it. So I think for a lot of a good framework for thinking about how to be more in states of like flow where you're not feeling like something's a chore is that either you decrease the challenge of the particular thing, so you break the big skill down
really
into like a smaller challenge, and then you start working on it, or you become more skilled. And so it's this balance of like figuring out what is the optimal level of like challenge to skill, where the challenge has to be a little bit more than the skill you have to be actually enjoying the process.
Nice. When you're saying flow state, I keep thinking about runner's high, and I don't run, but a lot of friends who are runners are like, oh, you get these runner's high, and I'm like, I really want to at some point get there and understand, okay, what does that mean? I know someone who started running who said it took her a year and a half to get to the point where she felt that sort of runner's high. And that tells you that, hey, you got to stick through something for a certain amount of time before you reap the reward of what people are telling you, right?
Yeah, again, delayed gratification, man. It goes back to that. But walking is like a good example of that too. Like you walk for long enough and you will have similar, like, I think there's a walker's high, honestly, dude. Like there's something there. Because you walk for an hour and, you've been to the boardwalks here, like in Austin. Like when you're after a point, there's some conversations where you're just like flowing in these conversations and you're able to like instantly reply back and hear, like you're so present in the moment. I haven't given walking enough of a chance, honestly.
I had a guest on Sky. He runs an ad company. He does a paywall podcast called Sky's Mental Playground. And I was asking him, what's your piece of advice? He's like, take an 11-hour walk. And he has this thing where like, if you take an 11-hour walk, you go through these states where you just, I don't know if it's walker's high, but I'm guessing there's something where it's so hard that if you're able to get through it, then you unlock some things at some points in the journey, right? But I think that's an interesting perspective on how do you...
Yeah, like again, it's like, how do you break down the challenge to... It goes back to the same thing, and it applies for anything, dude. Yeah. Like, how do you break it down to the point where you are actually able to access it and then go into it? So it becomes the entry point for you to do the bigger things you want to do. Yeah. And I think a lot of people that want to start companies, for example, or are like very early in the process and are struggling, it's to like remind yourself that like the entry point is to like break down the challenge into smaller parts or work with other people that have figured out these challenges. Like those are both ways of going about it, because you're kind of like just trying to access the entry point easily. And I think that it works for walking, it works for building a company, it works for working in your job where you feel like you're kind of like stretched too thin. It kind of works for everything.
I was going to make a joke and say, if you're on Adderall, is it called flow state?
That's probably the best example of flow state that's out there.
Yeah. So I do this thing towards the end. I'll ask you a bunch of random questions, and then we'll do that one question segment. One thing I like to get from every guest is, Are there 3 resources that you recommend to someone listening? It could be for whatever.
3 resources.
In any kind of medium. Doesn't have to be like a book.
Is it for someone who's trying to build something, or who is it for?
Because you're doing the podcast, let's do it for someone who's trying to figure out where their passion or where their calling is, or where they think they're going to enjoy the most.
So I think to remove the fear of pursuing your calling, the book Range by David Epstein is fantastic. Like, it's one of the, like, a very research-backed book on how just trying enough things leads to better outcomes when you finally specialize on the thing that you really want to pursue than just like specializing from the get-go.
Nice.
And I think it kind of like gives you actual examples of people that we admire and respect who did those things. Like, they just tried a bunch of different things and then they found the actual thing they want to kind of go deeper into. So it removes the apprehension and anxiety of like trying different things and feeling like, oh, you're just like exploring and that's kind of bad. No, exploring is awesome. Like, it's where everything starts. So that's one book. I would say I have currently been going into a deep dive of John D. Rockefeller.
Okay.
And currently
like
what
his life,
his biography. But currently what I'm reading is the 38 letters that he wrote to his son. And for people that don't know, John D. Rockefeller had 2 goals very early on in his life. It was 1, to be the wealthiest man in America, check, and 2 was to live to 100. And this is in 1800s. It's kind of like living to 150 at this point.
Yeah.
He lived to 97.
Okay.
And in these letters, he kind of like breaks down all the different reasons for pursuing things.
Okay.
And he kind of gives us sort of like an advice to like his son on why you should stay in the game, why it's more important to do that. So I feel like it would be a very good book for anyone that's sort of thinking about how to pursue something, because the
book.
It's not a book. It's just a collection of his letters, actually. But it is a book with a collection.
Right.
So that would be another resource. Third one, I would say that the third thing that I would honestly, more like a exercise to do. Something that I started doing like last year is that I would, and I think this is more tactical. So I wrote a letter to my future self. That's scheduled for the end of this year, and it's written in the format of like, you will, and then do these things, and
something
you will
like what Mr. Beast did of like.
Oh really? He did that?
So he did this thing where he was like, I think he wrote a letter to himself at ages maybe, or like there's like some timeline, like 1 year, 5 year, 10 year, whatever. And he's like, hey, if you don't have 1 million subscribers by now, you're like probably dead, and what, like I don't remember exactly.
Yeah.
But like he had these things, and so in one of his letters it's like, hey, you should be at 1 million by now. And at that point he has at 20 million, right? So if you haven't, maybe you should stop doing this. Like, he's written a bunch of stuff, and so and he has these videos on YouTube, not written per se, and they're auto scheduled to post. And so I think 3 of them have done. I think the next one is 10 years out or 5 years out. So people are very curious to see what he said in that video, but something similar.
Yeah, it's something very similar. And you know, if you quantify things, you know, the reason we quantify things is to make sense of them.
Yeah.
So like putting whatever, like number of these people I want to have on my YouTube channel, or
it's a metric of success.
Yeah,
right? Because
yeah.
you have no other way of quantifying joy.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, like.
Yeah. And one thing that came out of Rockefeller's letter is like the metrics you put to these things are an easy way for you to remind yourself of where you're at. But don't forget that the biggest thing that's actually coming out of every single one of these journeys is the kind of person you're becoming. So I tried to put the letter that I wrote to myself as a way of the kind of person that I've wanted to become a year from now. And so it's a lot of like, you will be a reliable business partner or a good son to like your parents, and you will do this, that. So I tried to put it in a way that like it kind of goes into the qualities that I actually want to develop more in the year. So I feel like that would be a good resource for someone to
And
try.
are you doing it just a year out? Are you doing it 2-3 years out?
I'm doing it every year.
Okay.
Like, I think it's worked out really well in terms of
Have
like
you thought about doing a 5-year or 10-year?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I just find it very hard to think about 10 years down the line, like how things would pan out. But I do think that like the actions that I'm taking for that year will lead to the next thing opening up. And a lot of times I've noticed, man, like when we started GigPay, like there was a certain idea of what we wanted to do in the payment space. And when you start talking to more and more people and you start developing a thesis, other things open up. And so for me, it's like, how can I go beyond the year, through the year, following the things that I said I want to do? And just from that, the next thing opens up. And so it's about like being curious enough to observe how new things are coming up and opportunities are coming up. So that's kind of why I kept it to a year, to be honest.
Cool. Another thing I like asking is, what do you think is your support system?
I think if I had to genuinely answer that question, I rely a lot on myself to figure things out. And I have some people in my life. My parents are definitely that part of that. My younger brother is definitely part of that. And then like,
is he in the States or India?
He's in Toronto. He's in Canada.
Oh yeah, you mentioned this. Yeah.
And he like family for sure. But then I have 2-3 of my best friends, like Ribhav, Rohan, Derek, who's in Austin. Like, shout out to all of them. They are like people that I can probably talk about anything and everything.
Nice.
So those are like the more daily kind of check-ins with people. And family is for like, if something truly catastrophic happens, which thankfully like has not really happened, to be honest, I go to them.
Nice. Pretty cool. I do this segment where I'll ask you a last question from a previous guest.
Yeah.
And we'll ask you to give me one for my next guest. So your question is, maybe what would need to be true for you to give up the idea of actively managing the day-to-day of your team and instead be very clear on strategic priorities and a why for your team, and only offering support needed to achieve these strategic priorities regardless of where they're physically located. And for a little bit of context, this stemmed from us talking about a lot of companies are now doing RTO and are causing people to come to office. Whereas the contradictory or hypocrisy is that all these big tech companies have offshore teams that are doing a bunch of work, right? And so we can take this any angle, because I don't know if you're actively managing people. But let me know if you have a
response. We do have a team that's actually offshore as well. So I manage that team in Brazil. And nice. I guess I can give some answer. Yeah. So I guess the question is around like how much hands off you need to be with a team like that versus like being in the details.
Yeah.
Kind of reminds me of founder mode versus manager mode. But currently, I think there's seasons where you have to be deep in the details of things and like work with your team on figuring out that. So for example, right now I'm working on a relatively big project for our startup where we're building our own internal ledger for doing all kinds of payment operations across the globe. And for that, we need to have an understanding of like what each country offers, how the flow of funds happen. And so to tell our engineering team in Brazil what to do, we need to give them a clear understanding of it. Once they have an idea of what it is to be done, I typically am much more hands-off. And currently I'm in the transition to like being hands-off, where they kind of they have the idea of what we actually need to build there, so they can do the things. But I will keep on checking in to like see how that's kind of going.
Makes sense.
So it is like, it's kind of a bit of both, honestly. At all times, it's just like the ratio changes.
Makes sense. Yeah, and I think the reason we're talking about this is it stemmed from, hey, you don't need to, if you're the kind of person who's setting meetings constantly to get updates, that means you feel like you're not doing your job correctly. Because if you trust your team, and if I've told you, hey, go figure this out, I should trust you enough to go get it done and tell me when it's done, or tell me when, hey, you're blocked, right? Similarly with my agency in India, I've told my team that, hey, here's everything you guys have full liberty to do on. So if I say go do this, I would rather expect you to be like, okay, this is done, instead of coming back and be like, oh, what do I do here? You have full liberty. I don't penalize you for making any decision. Only thing is either client facing or money related, where I'm like, hey, maybe make sure you're confident about this and reach out to me if you're not. Everything else, you have full reign to do anything and everything, right? And so I think that's sort of where the conversation started from. But
one thing on that, like the key thing is like to create the space where people can be honest about where they're at. And so we've had a lot of the situations where like things weren't built the way we had wanted them to, or were just like complete different expectations. And so then it was on making sure that we had that trust in each other, that we could just share that and not feel like we're going to be like, penalized for that stuff. So yeah, I agree.
Makes sense. What's your question for my next guest?
So question is, so Peter Crone, who's like philosopher of sorts, I guess, says this thing where it's like, people and circumstances show you where you're not free. So I wanted to ask the next guest, where do you feel like you're not free in your current journey?
Cool. That's all I had for you. Current journey. What do you want to plug? Where should people reach out? What should we link for you? What should we plug for you?
Yeah. Podcast, True Kauling on all platforms, Spotify, YouTube, LinkedIn. You can just reach out to me directly on Sarthak Kaul or follow the page True Kauling. And if you guys are in the creative space, need help with payments, you can follow GigPay on any platform, particularly LinkedIn.
Sweet. Well, thank you for coming on. I appreciate the time.
Thank you, man.